Okay. Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Northern Area Planning Committee. And I apologise for the 5-minute delay starting, but we're good to go now. I'm Councillor Sherry Jesperson. I'm chair of this committee. With me is Councillor Mary Penfold, the vice chair. The officers we have with us today are Simon Sharp, who is the senior planning officer, Hannah Smith, a planning area manager, George Dare and Megan Rochester, who are our democratic services officers looking after us today and keeping us in place. We will be shortly joined, we hope, traffic permitting, by our lawyer. The council members are all around us. They will introduce themselves each when they first speak. Thank you very much. For visitors who've not been to a planning meeting before, and for those watching live, I will briefly outline the procedure. So we have a number of applications before us today, which we will consider in turn. For each application, I will invite the case officer to present their report and recommendations, followed by presentations from any other officers, if there are any. The reports and background papers for these applications have been available for members to read and to discuss with officers prior to the meeting. Next, I will invite those members of the public who've registered to speak, to address the committee. Please come to the table there and just press the right-hand button on the microphone and it will turn on automatically. Each speaker has 3 minutes, and in the interest of fairness, I won't allow anyone to overrun. We've heard from all the public speakers. I will close the public part of the meeting and no further interventions are permitted. Committee members will then ask any questions on points of clarification, and then they will deliberate and come to a view, and we will have a vote. I must remind visitors that this is a Dorset Council meeting held in public, not a public meeting. So only those members who've registered to speak are allowed to speak today, and you mustn't speak directly to any members of the committee or pass any information to them during the committee, because if you do that, that could invalidate our proceedings. So that's excellent. That's the procedures dealt with. So now to our agenda. Megan, first off, do we have any apologies?
So we have received apologies from Councillors Stella Jones, Emma Parker and Les Fry.
Thank you very much. And just for the information of the committee, I know that Les Fry and Emma Parker, Councillors Fry and Parker, are both in court this afternoon, but I should quickly explain that they're defending a planning hearing in court. So a planning decision, a licensing decision in court this afternoon. So members, do you have any declarations of interest? None. Lovely, thank you. Members, can I confirm the minutes of the last meeting as being a correct record?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I will sign them at the end of the meeting. Public participation I have covered, and so on without more ado to the first of our applications. This is an application to demolish the existing barn and erect 8 dwellings, vehicle access and ancillary work. This is an outline application with all matters reserved, and I think it's the first time we've seen this one, and it's for Voscombe Farm, New Road, Bourton. First of all, Simon Sharp, would you like to give us your presentation, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So this application is just on the edge of Bourton, right at the top of the village. If I may share the screen, and then you'll be able to see the context, and I'll talk you through the slides which show the proposal and the site surroundings. So the site is near to the sunset border on the western end of Borton Village. It directly abuts one of the houses on the edge of Borton. The site is shown on the red on the screen. It's quite faint on that screen, but that hopefully gives it a clearer indication. So the site is currently a greenfield site. It has a barn on it. It also is predominantly pasture, uncultivated, semi-improved by my reckoning looking at the site. It's currently characterised by quite a swathe of buttercups when I went yesterday. So drilling down, you can see the existing barn on the site and the land, which is predominantly pasture. The applicant's house is directly to the west. There is another house outside of the applicant's control directly to the east. If members know Borton, the road which the site fronts onto is the old A303. The current A303 bypass is further south than the site. The land to the rear is in agricultural use, rising up to the area of outstanding natural beauty, the Cramble Chase and West Wiltshire outstanding area of natural beauty. So the plan on the screen now shows the site edged in red. The land edged in blue is the applicant's land outside of the site. So you can see the site area extends to just under 1.5 acres in old money, 0.57 hectares. Giving a bit more of the context of the site's constraints. So the site is now shown on the red rectangle, just the location of it. You can see the settlement boundary on this plan is the one from the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan is made, so it is part of the development plan. You can also then see the county boundary, which also coincides part of it coincides with the area of outstanding natural beauty, which is the area shown in the dotted shading beyond. For the land, you can see the contours of this map rises up northwards away from the site. You'll see there are also public rights of way, but I'll have another slide which shows those public rights of way in more context. So this is another extract from the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan has identified what it calls green fingers and local green space. The site is not a green finger or local green space, but as you see, it is outside of the settlement boundary in that made neighbourhood plan. Now, the application before you today, members, is an outline application with all matters reserved for subsequent approval. That differs from the previous refusal. The previous refusal had scale, layout, and access determined. This application is all matters reserved for subsequent approval. Nevertheless, this illustrative plan has been submitted to evidence that the 8 dwellings can be accommodated on the site, responding to the concerns the inspector had with the previous refusal, the dismissal at appeal, about character. It also demonstrates that a mix of dwellings can be accommodated on the site, open space, the access arrangements onto the existing adopted highway and drainage, etc. We'll come back to this plan. So these are the site photographs. We're looking west along the old A303. The last house in the village in the settlement limit is the one on the right-hand side. You can see it with the dormer windows. It's actually a pair of semis, hence the different windows. You can also see that, as we'll see in a moment, the land drops down to the turning for Chaffeymore at the bottom of the hill. So now we're looking back east towards the village. Things to note here, you can see the church tower, the church being listed. You can see the hedge on the left, mainly comprised of field species, hawthorn, some elder in it. You can see that there's a bank between the hedge and the pavement. The field, which is the large part of the site, is on a slightly higher ground than the road. You can see also, members, that there is a footway on both sides of the road, albeit that it's the south side that benefits from the street lighting. This slide is looking west along the footway adjoining the hedge, which is the site frontage. The site extends past these barns. So where, which is actually my car is parked, you can see is the existing access into the barns. And you can see the land drops down past the dwelling in the applicant's control to the junction, which goes up through to Pencilwood around the Chaffeymore hamlet. There is a gap between Chaffeymore and Borton. So we're now on the site looking east back towards that house which you saw on the road frontage. So the road frontage is out of shot on the right-hand side. You can see there's a hedge on the eastern boundary of the site. This is a series of photographs that arc around in a anti-clockwise direction. So we're now looking towards the northeast corner. One of the things we'll pick up, members, is that the land slopes up away northwards, and that there is the hedge and the trees just beyond the northern boundary of the site. So that's this boundary, the northern boundary of the site, the hedge and the trees, and this is that pair of semis which you saw on that last photograph. Just at this juncture, I thought I'd just give you a comparison slide between the purely indicative illustrative plan, which is the top one, which is the current application. Again, remind members that it's all matters reserved, so you're not considering the layout. And the refused application, which is quite different in terms of it had 10 dwellings rather than the proposed 8 now. And you can see it had that courtyard layout with dwellings backing onto the existing road, the parking in front of the dwellings, very different character to the indicative layout that is before members today. So now we're looking northwards. You can see how the land rises up. In a few moments, members, you'll see shots, camera shots taken from the top of that rise along the public right-of-way, looking back down to the site level. This photograph was taken, obviously, in late winter, so the trees are not in leaf. The photos taken from the public right-of-way are recent, so the trees will be in leaf in those photographs, and you'll also see the dandelions and buttercups of the site. To swing around again, you'll see here's the edge of the barn within the site. Here's the tree, which you'll see again in a moment on the corner of the site, and the land rising up away from the road and the site. Looking west, so the road frontage is just out of sight on the left-hand side on slightly lower ground. Here's that tree again, which is in the corner of the site. You can see the barns of no architectural or historic merit. A view looking southwestwards, members. So across the road, there's my car again as the indication of where that frontage is. So looking over onto the lower vale with the hillside behind. Now we're at the southwest corner of the site, so we're looking back towards that barn, there you can just see on the right-hand side that dormer bungalow on the edge of Borton. And there's that tree. This photograph was taken in May, so it's now in leaf. And there's a better shot of it. So it's that tree there that you were looking at in that photograph. So as the slide is annotated as such, these are important views identified in the Made Neighbourhood Plan. And there are references to those views in the inspector's decision letter on the previous refusal, although importantly, as a material consideration for you members, the important views were not considered to be an issue determinative to that last appeal. It was more about the character changes. But nevertheless, it's the Made Neighbourhood Plan, and the important views are identified in it. So it's clearly an issue of consideration that needs to be considered. So the arrows are obviously the direction of the view. So this is one of those important views, looking from the road through the gap up to up onto the hillside. And the public rights of way, which are there in the sort of purple colour, are the locations, the receptors for those other viewpoints identified in the neighbourhood plan. Now, just as a point of note, members, if members have visited the site and walked around its vicinity, the definitive line of those public rights of way differs slightly from the trodden line on the ground. So what I have done on my photographs is only taken photographs from where the definitive line and the trodden line coincides. So this footpath rising up the hill, hopefully you can see where my cursor is actually on the eastern side of a hedge. So the view is not afforded back towards the site because the hedge is in the way, albeit people in reality walk on the western side of the hedge where the view of the site is afforded. And then there's a kissing gate in the hedge halfway up the hill, and you cross onto the western side of the hedge, and that's when the views are afforded. And there we go. So you can see the trodden line, which is the definitive line now of one of the public rights of way, and there's the site. So you can see other development is visible in that panorama, but the undeveloped nature of the site is also noticeable. There's that trodden line. And we're sweeping along that top public right of way. You can see development is visible. We can see the coniferous trees, and there's the site. And again, we're walking along that top public right of way. It is well used, so it is a sensitive receptor. I've passed many people walking along these footpaths when I've visited on occasions, because I have actually more than one application in Bolton, so walking along that footpath has been quite a regular occurrence for me in the last few months. So moving on to these heritage matters. So here's the site, you can see it with the barn. There are a number of listed buildings in the locality. They're listed in the report. One of them is the church here. In the previous in dismissal of the appeal, the inspector didn't consider there was any harm to the significance of those designated heritage assets. their setting would be preserved. As you'll see from the officer's report, that is the view still of officers. And you can see those listed buildings, part of that prevailing character, predominantly linear, punctuated by some green gaps in the village. But there are also, including some of the listed buildings, clusters of dwellings that project further back away from the road, not exactly perpendicular to the road, but certainly not linear development along the road. And so that is definitely part of that prevailing character that needs to be considered when you're considering that indicative layout plan. And that gives you another indication of how those dwellings are orientated at right an angle to the road. And there are those gaps. So the application site is not the first gap. It's not a matter of there being continuous development until you get to the neighbourhood plan settlement limit, and then abruptly there is that gentle transition between development and the countryside. Indeed, there are actually gaps which are identified in the neighbourhood plan throughout the village. So that concludes the slide presentation. You'll see, members, in the report that we're back into our favourite realm of tilted balance. So that's something that you will need to consider unless you are minded to refuse the application on one of the footnote issues, such as listed buildings and the harm to their significance. But I think it's quite clear from the inspector's previous decision letter and in the officer's report that there aren't any of those footnote reasons for refusal, and we are in the territory of the tilted balance being engaged. And so what is before you is do the benefits of the housing supply, we are still needing that housing supply, as reflected in the most recent housing delivery test results, are those benefits derived from the proposal significantly and demonstrably outweighed by adverse impacts. And that is for you to consider today, members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Comprehensive as ever. We have no presentation today from highways because there are not significant highways issues with this, but of course, if there are any questions on highways matters, Simon can take them. Moving on then to hear from our public speakers. The first speaker we're going to hear from today is Robert Neville. Thank you very much. Who is speaking for the agent?
Good afternoon. The applicant thanks you very much for the opportunity to speak in support of the proposed development of up to 8 new homes at this site on the edge of the village of Bolton. Before I go any further, we would just like to commend your officers on a thorough and detailed and well-balanced report and presentation. As you are aware, the application site has been the subject of a previous unsuccessful application and appeal. In dismissing the appeal, the inspector accepted that the principle of development could be considered acceptable in the light of the lack of 5-year housing land supply and that proposals resulted in significant benefits through the provision of new housing. However, he further considered that while there would be very little harm to landscape character and important views of the countryside, that the proposed scheme, which was of much more urban form, would lead to incongruous development that did not provide a sensitive transition between settlement and countryside. The application is again submitted in outline form with an indicative layout demonstrating how a scheme for 8 homes can be successfully delivered. The council would retain control over the site and specific construction details at the subsequent detailed application stage. My client has taken on board the comments expressed by the inspector, and we have also worked with your officers during the application, which has allowed proposals to evolve and result in a low density, loose-knit scheme, which we hope you will agree presents a more sympathetic form of development for the site. Your officers accept the position expressed by the inspector with regards to the principle of development, and you will note that there are no objections from any technical consultees on the application, including highways, ecology, drainage, and the conservation team. In addressing previous concerns, we have reduced the number of units and presented a more linear form of development with a greater degree of sympathy with the existing pattern of development within the village. Further key design evolution is setting back of the homes and provision of additional planting to the front of the site, demonstrating how landscaping can be enhanced to create a soft green gateway into the village, providing attractive landscape setting, transitioning from settlement to countryside. The removal of the existing unsightly barn and introduction of additional landscaping and attenuation pond features would not only be to significant benefit of the visual amenities of the site, but also introducing new habitats, which would be to the significant benefit of biodiversity at the site. Include the proposals looked forward to bring forward a sustainable form of development which will provide much needed housing, contributing to meeting the council's requirements for maintaining an appropriate housing land supply. Scale and nature of the development would not be out of keeping in the context and would provide significant social, economic and environmental benefits. We therefore kindly request that the application is approved in line with the officer's recommendation. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. Before I ask my next speaker to come forward, just for completeness and for the benefit of the public, can I introduce the council's lawyer, Phil Crowther, who was held up in traffic, but is with us now, and very welcome you are too. Thank you very much. Next, we would like to hear from Peter Williamson, who's speaking on behalf of Bolton Parish Council. Peter, the floor is yours.
Madam Chair, thank you. My name is Peter Williams and I am the Vice Chair of Bolton Parish Council. Bolton Parish Council objects strongly to this development for the following reasons. Proposed development will be contrary to the local plan. Firstly, the applicant has failed to establish that there is an identified local and essential rural need, inverted commas, as stipulated within Policy 6. The 2021 annual monitoring report records that in the first 10 years of the plan, there were 36 housing completions in Bolton. Added to this figure should be the balance of the Bolton Mill development, which within the next couple of years will add a further 27 dwellings, taking the total completions figure to 63, amounting to an increase of approximately 20% for the total number of new dwellings constructed in Bolton since 2011. Secondly, this development will be contrary to Policy 20, since there is no need for housing on the field, which forms the major part of the application site, especially since it is outside Bolton's settlement boundary. The application site extends beyond the existing built form to the west of the village and would close an important green space which separates the main village of Bolton from the hamlet of Chaffeymore. Siting dwellings on this site would be in contravention of Bolton's adopted neighbourhood plan policies 1B, 1C and 10, in that it would represent an inappropriate extension of the village boundary. This development will be detrimental to the landscape quality of the area, particularly views from the setting of the AONB to the north of the application site. Inward views of the surrounding landscape from viewpoints to the south would also be harmed by this development. Paragraph 8 of the MPPF sets out 3 dimensions to sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. Taking each of these in turn, economic, whilst there might be some short-term economic benefits arising from the construction phase, the longer-term economic benefits of these additional dwellings will be negligible and would not compensate for the visual harm caused to the landscape. Social, proposed dwellings would not be affordable, nor would they provide any social housing. Environmental, the proposed development will result in harm to the character and beauty of the countryside, which would outweigh any perceived benefits. So this development would not tick any of these boxes. On behalf of Bolton Parish Council, I therefore request that the committee refuses this application.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
Very nicely taken hint on the phone. Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite members, first of all, if you have any questions on points of clarification on what you've heard this morning, please don't feel that you must ask a question, and please don't ask a question if it has already been asked. And I will start just at random with Councillor Appleby. Do you have any questions?
Chairman, I don't. It's been a very good presentation and the comments have been very enlightening.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jones, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Councillor Rideout, any questions?
No, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Heatley, any questions?
I have nothing at this stage, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, do you have any questions?
I do.
Good.
Councillor Matt Hall, representing Sherborne West. Couple of points of clarification, if I can. Forgive me if I'm missing it, but usually these reports to me are quite clear. So, you know, we often have the phrase, we're having to do this because of presumption in favour of sustainable development. And this report sort of dances around that. It makes reference to paragraphs 14 and 11. So I presume we are looking at this in presumption in favour of sustainable development. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So it's quite clear that there is a conflict with the development plan, and the application was advertised as such. The Parish Council quoted the policies which applied to the countryside, but we are in the realms of the presumption. So we are in where the tilted balance is engaged, and that's because of the position with regard to the housing delivery test.
2 further questions.
Carry on.
The first one, sustainable development is based around the 3 principles of economic, social and environmental. The economic one I'm struggling with. I'm not sure just because land is available that it's in the right place, but I think that's for a future one when we can determine access. Social, I understand. The environmental one, unless I'm missing something, most of what is written about biodiversity does suggest that it is either at best keeping with the standard level that is currently available or actually regressing, where section C actually talks about improving biodiversity. So am I missing something, or is there no improvement in biodiversity? Also, MPPF section 78 says that development in rural areas should reflect local needs, but I can't see that there is actually any specific local need said. Am I missing something? Thank you.
Can we do the biodiversity first?
Yeah, so thank you. I mean, the site at the moment, the barns are such that they don't actually provide habitat for protected species such as barn owls, bats. The actual green, pasture area is species poor. It's semi-improved grassland, in my opinion. So there, with that, the illustrative layout provides that clear scope for biodiversity net gain, because you are basically changing from a species poor pasture land, albeit with the the hedges around which are being retained as part of the proposal, and the barn, and you're going to, if you can see the illustrative layout, it is indicative only. Layout is not considered at this stage, but what it does evidence is that density. You can see the amount of land that can remain undeveloped for that biodiversity lift, that net gain on the site. And that is a change from the previous proposal, which had the 10 units in and where the layout was considered, and it was a pretty poor suburban layout in my view. So the answer to the question on the biodiversity is yes, it does respond to that. The second question, remind me, was the need. So the need, there's clearly the Dorset need, and we are in the, again, without wanting to reiterate, we are in the realms of the engagement of the tilted balance, and we're looking to respond to that Dorset need. So although the development plan policies needs exceptional circumstances beyond settlement limits, as we've seen on many months of committee, when you have the tilted balance, you're judging whether the site is the proposal is sustainable, and in our officers' minds, it is a sustainable location responding to that Dorset need, and specifically the identified North Dorset need.
That's the answer. So we're talking about a marginal net gain on biodiversity on the basis of the plan that is indicative, and the matter of the local need is one where the argument that we're very familiar with is that local need is overridden by the tilted balance, unless we have ground to determine otherwise. So two very good questions. Thank you. Councillor Cook, any questions at this point?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Cook, representing Shaftesbury Town. Just one question regarding the settlement balance and the tilted balance and the settlement boundary. Reference was made by the representative from Boughton Parish Council of the separation of Boughton and the hamlet of Chaffeymore. Can you give me or give this committee some guidance as to whether the tilted balance takes into account those separations of two separate areas of population, and whether that should be, for us, a material
consideration? Thank you. Yes, yes.
Thank you, Councillor. It's clearly a material consideration. So although you are outside, and I'll put the settlement limit back on the screen now. So the settlement limits, the black line, the site location is identified by the red rectangle. So the settlement of Chaffeymore or the hamlet of Chaffeymore is at the bottom of the slope. You can see Chaffeymore Farm. Those members who were on the committee might remember the application for a site for a yoga studio, which was up here on this lane. So that's the hamlet of Chaffeymore. So when you're considering that tilted balance, benefits against whether there are significant and demonstrable adverse impacts, then coalescence is part of that mix. So that is a material consideration when you're doing that balancing exercise. Now, I can try and just, that probably the location plan is one of the best plans. Obviously on the south side, you can see there's the clear gap between Boughton Village up here to the east and the start of Chaffeymore down here at the bottom of the slope. If you can recall, and I can put the slide up again, but on east of this, the listed row, there is another gap. Then you have the cemetery. So as I said in my presentation, it's not a matter of there being continuous development at Boughton and then there's a gap to Chaffey Moor. There are gaps. West of the applicants, the farmhouse, there is another, albeit shorter gap to the start of the next pocket of development in Chaffey Moor. And of course, Chaffey Moor itself is characterised by gaps between dwellings. But yes, it is a material consideration about whether you feel that development in the application site results in a coalescence of Chaffey Moor and Bourton Village. I reiterate that significant and demonstrable adverse impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Penfold, your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not really a question as such. It's a point to note, really, that it's the retention of hedges. I think that's extremely important in the area there, because obviously we're here in countryside and the hedges are extremely important. What about the upkeep of these hedges?
Thank you, Councillor Penfold. So, remembering this is an outline application, so what the plan is seeking to demonstrate is that the mix of dwellings and the quantum of development is achievable whilst retaining those hedges and the trees. In officers' minds, it can be done. What we would expect is a landscaping reserve matter coming forward, which shows the retention and then the management of those. Normally, I mean, years and years ago, when I first started planning, 30 years ago, councils used to take on that land. It's predominantly now private management agreements for communal space. I would imagine that would be the case in this, and that would be secured through a condition on a landscaping reserved matter.
I just feel it's important, you know, in actually where it is. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just trying to check here, Simon, as I'm looking through the conditions. Have we, you say we would condition the landscape management at reserve matter stage. Have we conditioned at this stage the retention of the hedgerows? I mean, in other words, is that part of what we're considering today? If not, why not? Have we, sorry, I'm flicking through my conditions here.
I don't believe we have, Chair, because I was relying on it coming in as part of the landscaping reserve matters, but it can be open for members to do that. One thing I have been clear on from consultation with Steve Savage, the highways officer, is that we're not in the realms of hedge removal to achieve visibility displays.
Good, good. Well, members, I think we might want to come back to that if we are minded to approve this application, to consider whether or not we would like to condition at this point the retention of the hedgerows rather than leaving it to chance at a later date. I have no further questions, so I'll now throw the meeting over to discussion and debate, and I will start on this occasion with the local member, Councillor Rideout, who looks after Bourton. Councillor Rideout, would you like to begin the discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Belinda Rideout, representing Gillingham Ward. I asked, or I requested this proposal to come before the committee because I'm fully aware how proud Bourton Parish Council and the villagers of Bourton are of their views around the village, particularly the views at both ends of the village, inwards and outwards. And that is evident in their village design statement, which was adopted in September 11, which identifies two important views, which we have seen, somebody showed us just now. There are two views which actually are across the proposal site. The one from New Road, which is the A303, looking up across the site to the northwest to Chaffey Moor and Chaffey Moor Hill, and also the site from footpath N57, the view looking south across the site towards the Blackmore Bell. And I think it's quite evident in the photographs we saw, there are some really beautiful views because of the contour of the land. And also Borton's neighbourhood plan policy served to conserve the setting of important heritage assets, including Grade 2 listed St George's Church. Now, the approach to the village from the west, you can see, is open. It's fairly open and hedgerow. There's a farm, there's the barn, which is to be demolished, but it's got a real rural feel until you get to the crest of the hill where St George's Church looms up in front of you, and there are the semi-detached or semi-houses just on the crest of the hill. It's not until you're actually on the hill and you're looking down again into Borton, that's where Borton's development is, where the village is. And this proposal would extend the development of the village beyond the settlement boundary, beyond the crest of the hill, down into the countryside in the rural setting of the approach to Borton village. In my mind, this is closing the gap between Borton village and the very valued hamlet of Chaffey Moor. It's granted the layout, the revised layout in this application is an improvement on the previous scheme. We're only discussing today outline planning permission with all matters reserved. Whatever scheme is proposed for this site, which is the field and the barn that you can see there, it's on an elevated position to the road, and it will be clearly seen as you approach from the west into Borton. There's no doubt you will see those ridges. You will see those houses, the ridges of the houses from the footpath to the north and from the south view. It doesn't really give it justice there, but the field on the eastern side is quite elevated to the road. And it will be visible from public viewpoints, and of course have an impact on the setting of the heritage assets, including the church. The previous scheme for this site was refused by Dorset Council on 25th of November 2020, and a subsequent appeal was dismissed. In my view, nothing's changed. Material considerations have not changed for this site. In fact, Dorset Council is probably in a better place, housing land supply wise, and the housing delivery test than 2 years ago. The site context has not changed. And this is what Dorset Council, the first bullet point of the refusal, stated. The proposed development would be a consolidation, sporadic development in the open countryside outside the established limits of a settlement, appearing as conspicuous and uncharacteristic of the royal fringe location, which would lead to harm to the character and appearance of the area, and which outweighs housing land supply, and then goes on to the contrary to the Dorset local plan and neighbourhood plan policies. So it's very, very clear there, and it's very relevant in this application. There's no identified local need or essential rural need for 8 dwellings at this site. There's no affordable provision. And I think we should be getting great weight to Borton neighbourhood plan and local plan policies in this case. And I would remind members, if I may, Borton neighbourhood plan is more than 2 years old. Doesn't mean it's worthless. It might be worth less in terms of the weight we can apply to it, but it certainly isn't worthless. And I'm concerned that any development on this site would constitute harm to the sensitive transition between Borton village and the rural countryside setting of the village, outweighing any benefits to the housing land supply.
Thank you very much indeed. And I particularly like the point that you made about our policies being worth less, not worthless. And I would remind members that that also applies to the settlement boundary, which in the tilted balance is worth less, but the settlement boundary is still there for as a material consideration for us to weigh, as it were, in the balance. Councillor Heatley, you're looking like you'd like to come in next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brian Heatley. The words that are ringing round my head are the words that came from the inspector about the previous proposal not making a sensitive transition between the two places. And that makes me then ask the question, well, what's different about this one, and is it better? Now, I can see how that row of houses in a very straight row on the edge of the village, in a place where the settlements are rather dispersed and so on, was not terribly sensitive. But on the other hand, it seems to me that the plan that has been put before us, which of course we know is not necessarily the final plan, but on the other hand, if we were to agree this today, I think if they came back with something like the old one, they'd be very silly. So we can take it. There's some acceptance of doing something like that. And I'm asking myself just how different it is. Now, I have a difficulty, which is that I don't know this area. A lot obviously depends on the rise and fall of the land here. And I'm having some difficulty in getting an idea of what this will look like. We haven't had a picture of a mock-up that actually does that. So I'm a bit undecided at the moment, but it's around that area that I think we ought to be making our decision.
Thank you very much. Good. Do you want to comment on what it will look like, or shall we carry on? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's an indicative layout, and what it will look like is houses in what was previously a field, essentially. Yeah. And I do take your point about and I take the point that Councillor Rideout has made about the particular characteristic of this village and the neighbouring village with its open spaces. I think that's one to bear in mind, but we'll probably just have to use our imaginations as the discussion goes on. So yes.
Sorry, Ted, yes, I'll have an answer to the previous question about the hedge and the reserve matter, the condition 1, which I framed in a way that it requires the landscaping reserve matter to include the retentions of the hedge. So there is a direction there from the condition, which basically sets those parameters within the reserved matters for the layout and the landscaping.
Good. We'll have a little look at that as we go round to make sure it's strong enough. But thank you very much. Yes, Hannah. Yes, please. Hannah Smith, area planning.
Thank you, councillors, for your comments. Just referring to the appeal decision at paragraph 9, I think the inspector was quite definitive in their assessment of the important views. I know Simon's talked about it. Paragraph 9, I therefore find that the development would not have a significant adverse effect on important views of the countryside, which is one of the aims of the Neighbourhood Plan Policy 1. Accordingly, the effects on the landscape would primarily lead to the loss of the existing undeveloped field, and any harm associated with that would be very limited given the settlement edge location. I think the focus really needs to be on the character points that we've discussed, and I think the refusal reason on the last application that was just read out, which is very pertinent. Yes. If those points do still stand, I think you need to consider about the important viewpoint, because I think the inspector sort of found on that point, and I know it is connected with character. Yes. I think we need to be clear that it is a material consideration, the previous appeal decision, and we need to be mindful of that in terms of what evidence we present to justify that if we're going down the route of views.
That's really very helpful. So that gives us a very helpful steer where how far we can push the important views, which the answer is not terribly far. Who would like to come in next? Yes, Councillor Hall, I see you.
I was just going to say, I think that Councillor Rideout has said it all quite eloquently.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Sorry, yes, Councillor Cook.
Yeah, I echo what Councillor Hall said, to Rideout said it earlier, but my main concern is this coalescence of different settlements, different populations. Yes. And my personal feeling is, and I think maybe some of my colleagues hopefully will agree, that there is a neighbourhood plan there, and having gone through that process from my own area, that is the definitive way, as I can see it, of looking for the community's views on how and where. And I do take the point that that the tilted balance says that we should be taking the land supply and the housing delivery test into consideration. But to push outside the settlement boundary, once it has been identified and a neighbourhood plan has been put together and approved, I think flies in the face of that whole process. And again, added to this coalescence of two communities, I feel that that is a major consideration.
Thank you very much. I think coalescence, that comes to the point about character, which I think we are, I mean, in terms of the relative weight of the neighbourhood plan against the tilted balance, that's one that we grapple with every meeting, isn't it? And it never goes in the direction we would wish, I think it's fair to say, but we are where we are on that one, and we're still only at 69%, and that is a fact that we have to, that we can't avoid. I'm looking, yes, Councillor Jones.
I find myself really quite torn on this one, because whilst I know about neighbourhood plans, how long they take, how expensive they are, and to me it doesn't really matter if it's 2 years old or 2 years and 6 months old, it's the neighbourhood plan. But I'm never sure how one actually measures housing need, because in my experience, and I mean this in the greatest respect, it's generally the older people who have houses, who aren't homeowners, who say there is no need. But it's the younger people, our children and our grandchildren, that can't get on the housing ladder. And certainly what I do know is that whenever a house comes up on the market, it's absolutely snapped up quickly. So I do believe there is a housing need. And certainly, well, we all know, whether we like it or not, people are moving out of London and so on to come to areas of beauty. To me, it doesn't actually matter whether it's in Chattingham or it's in Bolton, because you can drive along rural roads and see a small cluster of houses, and drive on a little bit further and see another small cluster of houses. That doesn't actually, I don't think that matters to me personally, although it's obviously very important to the residents of both areas. So in all honesty, Chair, I'm not quite sure which way I'm going to go at the moment, because I can't see a reason that can be upheld at appeal for refusing this, to be absolutely honest.
Absolutely fine. Before I come to Councillor Apothecary, just to be absolutely clear on with the question of housing need and how Dorset Council establishes housing need, it's not quite as emotive as you described it. There is actually a procedure. So we have local housing need, which is identified in the neighbourhood plan, which I think is the local, but it's not a survey around the existing homeowners to say, do you want any more houses or not? It's a bit more to it than that. And then there's Dorset-wide housing need, which comes into play with the tilted balance. Hannah, do you want to say a little bit, just clarify that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Local housing needs normally refers to affordable need. So
yes.
In the locality for affordable housing. So this site isn't being proposed as an exception site, which we'd expect to be brought forward as 100% affordable.
Yes.
In view of the lack of delivery, it's being brought forward as 100% open market dwellings to meet our need for dwellings against our housing targets, which are set out per annum, which we're failing to deliver at the moment, although we've made good grounds.
Yes, we have indeed.
The supply of housing, we just need the delivery to catch up with that. So the policy we're assessing them against is the overall housing policies, policy 2 and 6 of distribution of housing, rather than local need in terms of who has a local need in Bolton for affordable housing.
Yes.
I don't think, going back to a question that's a valid point that was raised by the Parish Council earlier, we haven't, I wouldn't say, reached a cap. There's no cap on development, and we haven't reached the point where this development would tip it over into an unsustainable amount of development for Bolton. When you take into account the local plan came in in 2016, if we're talking about a 20% increase since 2011, that was outside the current plan period.
Yes, quite.
So yeah, I mean, obviously cumulatively that you can cite impact, but I don't think we're at that point that we could uphold that.
No, we had this very conversation, I believe, at the last meeting, didn't we, about the tipping point, and I think the certainly we've had clear advice here that we're not at a tipping point for this particular village, but we always struggle, don't we, about where the tipping point might be, but it's clearly that we're not there yet. Nonetheless, the fact remains that we would probably, this would be a development outside the settlement boundary were it not for the tilted balance, and we have to keep that at front and centre of our deliberation, because whether we like it or not, the tilted balance is in play here, as with everything else that we consider. But Councillor Apothecary, would you like to comment?
Chairman, Councillor Apothecary, Gillingham and the villages. This is a very difficult one. I have a lot of sympathy with the residents of Bourton. You know, in every community, there are certain sites that are very dear to a town or a village, and I understand the emotion behind this. I think Councillor Rideout's view and summing up said most of what I feel, actually. I do have to say that I concur with Councillor Jones. Carol. In the way that at appeal, I don't know if our views would be strong enough, to be honest with you. So that's all I'm saying. I have huge sympathy. My heart wants to turn it down, but I think it would go to appeal, and I can't see that it wouldn't win the day. So that's where I stand, I'm afraid.
I've had no proposer or seconder. I mean, just if that was a genuine question from the heart, I mean, we have. Hannah, could you give the committee a steer, because I know people are ambivalent. If we were, and nobody has yet proposed to, but if we were to consider refusing it on the grounds that Belinda has suggested, how defendable at appeal is that? And that, sorry, that's, I can't phrase the question back there, but I'll be on really thin, because
I think it's down to the committee to make the decision on whether there is significant and demonstrable harm that we can cite at the appeal. So there definitely was harm found by the inspector. The inspector found that it was harmful in terms of it didn't make a sensitive transition from the settlement of Bourton to the rural area.
Yes.
So that was found to be, I can read the part of the appeal decision here where it says, rather than making a sensitive transition between Bourton and the countryside, the proposal would harm the soft landscape setting of the settlement to the detriment of its overall character and appearance. This would result in a conflict with the aims of policy, the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, which seek to ensure that development should be designed to improve the character and quality of the area within which it's located, make a sensitive transition between the village and the countryside, have regard to the special characteristics of the locality, and reinforce the underlying vernacular or character of its context. So the inspector found harm, not so much to the views, but definitely to the character of the area. So I don't know if we can get the plan back up. Thank you, Simon. What the inspector had last time was quite an urban form of, just quickly get
layout.
Back up.
Yes.
Yeah, the layout wasn't refined like it is now.
No.
What it comes down to is the consideration of whether this new layout overcomes that harm that was caused on the other scheme. So, which is the question Councillor Heatley came in
exactly,
with this is quite distinctly different, because it does push the development back. It has reference to what the inspector found harmful, which was the very engineered. You can see in the layout below, pushes the development back. It gives it a good screen space. The hedgerow would be retained, and that soft area would be retained there. And in, Simon, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, and just the other thing for you to bear in mind, members, is that inspector's appeal decision layout was before the inspector. So there was sort of no flexibility for the inspector to sort of determine that whilst, if layout had been reserved, the inspector could have come to the conclusion that the layout before them didn't work, but a layout could work.
Yes.
But because layout was not reserved for that dismissed appeal, then they had to consider that layout before them. And a lot of the commentary in the inspector's decision letter was about that layout. Was before you now, members, is a drop of 10 to 8 units, and also an indicative plan that, as you can see from the screen, in officers' minds is quite materially different to that layout that was considered by the inspector.
That's helpful, thank you. Councillor Cook had his hand up first, and then I'm coming to you, Belinda. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on that point, was to actually tease out the exact, trying to get into the inspector's mind, but was it specifically, did he specifically say the character of the proposed development, or was it that development was occurring and that was what was going to harm the character of what is already there? And that's the question that's sort of going around in my mind. If it's because development was proposed there, which would harm the character of the community of Bournemouth, that would lead me down the direction that we could defend this as an appeal. And therefore, I would maybe propose a.
Can we? Thank you. Can we comment on that? Because yes, please, Sana.
That's a really good point, Councillor. I think it was definitely in relation to the layout of the site. So if you look at paragraph 21, this is an inspector. I have found that there would be very little harm to landscape character and important use of the countryside. However, the proposed site layout would lead to an incongruous development that did not provide a sensitive transition between the settlement and countryside, permanently harm the approach to Bourton, creating an uncharacteristic suburban fringe that diluted the character of the settlement. So you can see here that was the layout. So it wasn't the principle necessarily. It wasn't views through. It wasn't closing a gap or losing Chappie Moor as a settlement in its own right. It was very much the site layout that was before the inspector. So I think we need to look at the layout that's now proposed indicatively, which could form part of reserve matters, and if it didn't, could be refusable on matters of being an unacceptable layout. Whether that actually pushes it over the line in terms of being a sensitive transition, where it does now seek to complement what's around it in terms of clusters of buildings. And I know that Simon asked for a revision through the application to better reflect local character. And Simon's done a great job of describing what the local character is around the site. And that's what I think we need to focus on, is that now harmful to see that on that site in terms of layouts?
Yes, which is quite difficult when we're looking at an indicative layout. But yes, Councillor,
Sorry, Chairman, if I can just pick up on that last again. That's the very dilemma that we do have in front of us. We don't know what it is going to look like. If we grant permission and then a scheme comes back that differs from that top drawing, because that is indicative only, where does that leave us?
That's not a problem, because we would refuse it on grounds that it didn't it was contrary to the inspector's approved comments. So we are actually better placed than we usually are in this case, because we do have the inspector's report to fall back on. So I think we can be reasonably confident that when this comes back at reserved matters, we will not be looking at an ugly, in my view, an ugly layout like this because of what the inspector said. So we are used to the fact that we often have only indicative layouts, but it does indicate that it could address some of those issues. Yes, Simon.
Sorry, I'm conscious that members have forgiven me.
Yes, please.
But just as I can empathise with members who, we've all been to the time when an outline application has been granted, and then the reserve matters come in, which are different, and you feel that the scope of what was granted at an outline has been rather diluted at the reserve matters. think what we have here is an indicative plan that shows the responses, but also those conditions which I've suggested, which actually put those parameters of what those reserved matters can be. So
Yes.
look, for example, at condition 1, which we've
Yes,
talked about
exactly,
before, Chair.
yes.
Hopefully that will give that assurance to members about how those reserved matters will
Yes.
come back in.
As I say, it's always a chance we take, but I think we're better placed on this occasion than we often are. Councillor Rideout, you've been waiting patiently to come in. Thank you.
Chairman. Oh, I've listened to everything. I'm trying to take this all in, and I'm still of the opinion that there is significant and demonstrable harm with this application on the character of the area, of the landscape character, the coalescence between the village and the hamlet, and the harm to the transition between the built and the rural. And looking at those two, we just had the comparable predictive layout site just now. The new one, although, you know, from that viewpoint, you might not see those houses so well, but when you're actually just starting to go up the hill into Bolton on the west, the land is elevated, and those houses now are being pushed to the back of the site where it actually is probably more elevated. So I think they're going to be even in more view than the first layout.
Are you proposing, do you want to test your views? You would like to propose to refuse, right? Would anyone be happy to second that?
I just ask another question.
You can ask as many questions as you like, Councillor Hall.
Just mindful of condition 2, where it's talking about basically giving 3 years for the reserved matters to come through. Is that a standard 3 years, or could we reduce that? I've just got this thought in my mind that we're sat here now, partially talking about housing delivery. For reserved matters to possibly take 3 years, for building to take another 3 years, and then we're 6 years down the line.
Is that, yes, a nice question, yes. Is it a standard clause?
Yes. They are standard conditions. In exceptional cases, if there's arguments around land supply on some applications, inspectors sometimes might reduce the time, but that's not normally...
We wouldn't have grounds to do that, no.
But it's a really good point, because I think that would be nice if we could insist on shorter timeframes. It would definitely help.
It would, it definitely would. So we've had a proposal. Councillor Ryder, can I just be absolutely clear then on the grounds on which you are proposing refusal, and you have them nicely articulated, if you could just share them with the committee.
Impact on the character landscape, coalescence between the village and the hamlet, and harm to the transition between the built up and the rural.
Right. That they sound to me. Is there anyone who would like to second that on that basis? Councillor Cook, you're seconding. Thank you very much. Anybody want to comment any further, or we'll put this proposal to the vote and see how the committee feels about it? Nobody wants to comment. Okay, we've had a proposal and a second that we refuse on the grounds that Councillor Rideout has articulated 2 or 3 times. So I think we're clear what we are and the weight we can give to them. All those in favour then of refusal on those grounds, if you could raise your hand. 3, 4. Those against? Right. Somewhat to my surprise, that refusal is carried. Okay, right, that refusal is carried then. Good, thank you very much indeed. Well done, Councillor Rideout, for arguing your case so articulately on behalf of your residents. Good, we will move straight on, if you're happy with that. Unless anyone's desperate for a break, we will move straight on to the next application. You all happy to move straight on? I'm bullying, I don't want to bully you. No, that's lovely. Good, thank you very much. We move on now to a planning application at the stables, in Melway Lane in Child Oakford. This is another one that's come before the committee because it's contrary to the opinion of the parish council. If you thought that the balance of the tilted balance versus the benefit was finely balanced on the last one, then this one is another such, I think, when we're talking about a very, as Simon expresses it so very nicely in his presentation, a very nicely balanced tilted balance here. Simon, can we hear your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll share my screen again, which will give you a way of so members, this is a site in the parish of Child Oakford. I'll put this first slide on the screen because we are in the realms of the tilted balance. We are outside of the development plan's settlement limits, but we are considered being a sustainable location within an acceptable walking distance of the services and facilities of the village. You'll see from that diagram that we are 200 metres from the nearest point of the settlement limits. We're not abutting it, we're 200 metres, but you'll see that by the crow flies, we're 360 metres from the school. It's about 500 metres on the lane and the road. You'll see that in more detail. 700 metres approximately to the shop, just over 400 metres to a bus stop, 730 metres to the public house. It's actually about 770 actually via road. I've walked those routes. Child Oakford is characterised by many lanes with not a lot of footways in the village, and not an abundance of street lighting, I think it's fair to say. And there are many locations within the settlement limit which have no street lighting, have no footways, and are actually greater distances to some of the services and facilities in this site. So that's something to bear in mind about the locational sustainability of the site. But you are 200 metres away from the nearest point of the development plan settlement limit. So you can see the site here, characterised at the moment by a stable. It's in horticultural use. Nearest dwelling here, you can see that although there's countryside, there are buildings, and you can see there's a tennis court here and garden. So we're not in the realms of open countryside all around, although it is obviously defined in development plan terms as being in the countryside. You can see the site edged in red. We're at the bottom end of the lane. I'll talk about the lane in greater detail as we go through the slides. And you can see the applicant also owns a long finger of land that's adjacent to this track. And you can see from the aerial photograph, there's a line of trees here, quite mature trees, quite varied in species. It includes a line of oaks, which I observed when I was on site. And there are, as you'll see also, there are public rights of way in the vicinity, albeit the site is well screened in winter as well as summer months. We'll come on to the elevations in a minute, but you can see this is for a single dwelling. and I think it's fair to say a very modest single dwelling as well. So, Melway Lane is characterised by a macadam surface along its length to actually the point, which we'll see in a minute, where the access spurs away from the lane. So you can see it's narrow, but it is metalled. It doesn't have street lighting. It doesn't have a segregated footway. It is wide enough for a vehicle to pass down, but not two vehicles to pass. But it is straight, and there is a passage en route. And as you can see, it's characterised not only by hedges, but also domestic garden fences. And further up towards the village centre, there is an area of concrete hard standing, which is used for parking, and it also doubles up as a elongated passing place for vehicles as well. So now we've got to the end of the metalled section of Melway Lane, and the turn into the site is here, as depicted by my...
I'm a bit concerned. I'm not sure how, when I saw these pictures on your screen, they're very much clearer. These pictures are not, given that
we seem to have lost some resolution.
Quite a lot of resolution, given that is quite, yes, if you look at those of you, well, if those of you who can, if you can follow it on your screens, you'll get a much better. Can we try that? Because it is quite important here.
There's also the resolution, Chair, as well.
Yes, it might be. Let's have some courtesy.
I don't know whether the...
Suggestion, Chairman,
yeah.
Bring it up in Google Maps somehow. It is a lot clearer.
Yes, but yes, it is. But we need to follow Simon's presentation. Yes. If you could, those of you who have your laptops.
Yeah.
Is there any way we can?
It's very clear on my screen, Chair, but
really not up there.
Resolution seems to be lost.
It really has.
It seems to have a slight shadowing.
And your pictures were so good that is there any way members in the committee can watch? No, because we'll only see that, won't we? We can't have access to what's on. I know, I'm concerned about members here in the room. If members can watch the live stream for a moment, could we do that? Right, if someone in the meeting could play it in, are you, yes. See, that's massively better. No, I'm all right, because I can sit on my laptop, but I think, members, if you could, if you could just bear with us a minute and let's get this sorted out, because there's really no point in looking at pictures like that. They're not,
Have we got to be logged onto the internet to get this?
Yeah, you can.
Right. Did it not automatically? Sorry, but I did that picture. Yeah.
Am I going to get the Wi-Fi password, Chair?
Do we have the Wi-Fi passcode? Yes, there it is.
It's case sensitive.
Say again. Yes, I think we probably will. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a little while, just so we're not faffing about in the public domain here, in public, and we will reconvene this meeting when we've sorted this out, because Simon's taken such lovely photographs, and that's really not good enough. Yes, you can use the opportunity to view of these pictures, in which case, when you're all settled down, we will resume. You were, do you want to go back just a couple of photographs then, and not back to the beginning, but just to the point where we were looking at your lovely snaps, and also to remind members of where we were in these pictures, in which case, when you all settle down, we will resume when you all settle down.
Yeah, go to the speaker.
So much for being on mute. Good, thank you. We will now resume, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just going back a couple of slides. So we talked about the distances, and hopefully members will see that distance slide on their screens. The site is, although it's outside the settlement limits, it's in a sustainable location in terms of the acceptable walking distances to the village's services and facilities, albeit that the lane access is metalled but not lit and has no segregated footway, but that's actually quite characteristic of many of the lanes of the village inside the settlement limits that don't also have street lighting or segregated footways. And some of the sites within the settlement limit are indeed actually a greater distance from some of the services and facilities than this site. So from the image on the screen, and hopefully on members' own screens, you can see the site is surrounded by some fields, but also that this end of the lane is also characterised by some development, including the house to the north, and that house is tennis court and quite extensive garden area. This image, hopefully now again also on members' screens, shows the site edged in red, but the applicant also owns land to the south, which is blue edged. There is a division of a hedge and quite a lot of mature trees, including some oak, for example, currently in leaf between the site and this track. And there is a public right-of-way at the top end as well, which this site shares its access with for the first few meters from the metalled end of Melway Lane. This is the site layout plan showing the footprint of that. So I described it before, quite modest scale dwelling, and the access coming in from the end of Melway Lane, swinging to the east and then into the site access. Looking south towards the site, which is depicted behind the trees and hedge by this arrow. You can see Melway Lane is single lane. It's relatively narrow, but it is metalled and it is characterised by domestic development, including frontage fencing. Now come to the end of the metal section of Melway Lane, where you turn east into the public right-of-way and then you turn right into the site. So that's the direction of the site. And I've just put this slide on just so members are aware where the end of the macadam is. It's literally at that point of access. Beyond is just an unmade track. You can see the grass growing in the middle of it. Not quite evident from this photograph, but the land does then gently start falling away. Obviously, in the Stour Valley here, and the land falls away towards the river. So now we're at that metalled end of Melway Lane. My car is in shot again, members forgive me. And you can see that there is a hardcore start to that public right of way starting beyond my car proper, and the site is accessed into the right here. So there's that public right of way. My car was parked about here. The camera on that last photo was here. And you turn into the site. And this is the metalled extent of Melway Lane, ending where the public right of way starts. So the adopted highway extends to the end of the metalled section. So now we're looking along the bridleway back towards that metalled section, and you can see the significant existing screening that is afforded. You can see through a mesh of branches the existing stable on the site, but it is very well screened from all directions. And this section actually shows that fall of the bridleway, and the red arrow is that extent of the metalled Melway Lane, and this is the boundary trees along Melway Lane. Now we're looking back along the public right of way towards the site access. Now we're actually on the field to the north of the site. So just beyond this hedge is the public right of way running east to west, which is where my car was parked. As you can see, you can't see anything from this screen that the hedge provides. And because of the density of the mesh of branches, that screening is still afforded in winter as well, importantly. Oops. Now we're looking at the long view. We're actually now east of the hedge, the public right of way, and this green bridleway public right of way is to the left of the hedge. We're actually looking at the land in the applicant's control back towards the stable building. You can see how contained that site is. For robust analysis, the applicant undertook some long view analysis. I think it's safe to say there isn't that wider landscape harm because of the containment of the site, but these are shown as part of that analysis, including obviously from the very sensitive receptors on Hambledon Hill. You obviously have a significant distance, and you pick up all the rest of the existing development in the Stour Valley. I won't dwell on those too long. So obviously, members, you're considering the dwelling on this application, its appearance, its scale, ground floor layout, say a modest size of dwelling. First floor layout, you can see using the roof space for this first floor accommodation to keep that scale modest. The elevations, you can see there's predominantly feather edge timber cladding, except for that engineering course of brick at the foot, which is not only reflecting prevailing character of a lot of buildings in this rural area, but also it's also with the silvering of the wood will assist in it assimilating further into the landscape. It's a very sylvan wooded landscape in the vicinity of the site. This section shows how that first floor is accommodated within the roof space. You can see natural slate is proposed for the roof covering. So an emphasis on natural materials, an emphasis on the modest scale. And this really just shows that screening and the comparison. You can see the outline of the dwelling in comparison to the existing tree heights. And there's the palette of materials that are that are proposed. So, dare I say it again, we're in the realms of our good friend, the tilted balance and the presumption. And your decision today, members, your assessment is whether the benefit derived from that supply of that modest small dwelling is outweighed significantly and demonstrably by adverse impacts. It's one of those where if we were not in the realms of the tilted balance, it would be contrary to the development plan and refused. But we are in the realms of the tilted balance, and this is a proposal where that benefit derived from the dwelling is not significantly or demonstrably outweighed by the adverse impacts in the minds of officers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. We have 4 speakers to hear from now. We have 2 people who would like to speak in favour of this application, and then we will hear from the Parish Council. Sammy Upton, would you like to come first, Mrs. Upton? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Sammy Upton. Sorry.
Right.
Good afternoon. My name is Sammy Upton, and I'd like to speak in favour of the proposal. I have known the applicant, Kay Gardner, for a number of years through the WI and through amateur dramatics and various events in the village. She's been involved in village events since she started keeping her horses in the village 25 years ago. Kay's proposed small 2-bedroom cottage will be her home, and she wishes it to be as eco and as green as possible, using solar power, a heat source pump, a borehole for water, and a small sewage plant. Kay has been living off-grid for the past 6 months and only uses her generator when she's working or when it's cold or when she needs to change her leisure battery, as she is aware at the moment that it is noisy. The materials used to build the cottage will be carefully sourced, and it's been designed to blend in with the natural surroundings and wood-clad to blend with the neighbouring buildings. On a personal note, I have to say that Kay and I celebrated with a glass of bubbly when a document inferring that planning permission had been granted by delegated powers was posted on the County Council planning website. It was there for all to read from Wednesday to midday Friday when it disappeared. It then took 10 days or so for Kay to be told that her application had to be heard at a planning committee meeting. At the Parish Council meeting, Kay was extremely disappointed that Parish Councillor Cottage did not declare a personal interest, as he is the nearest neighbour to her plot of land. Councillor Cottage had informed Kay that he would object before the plans were submitted and before the application was discussed by the Parish Council. The application was discussed in private by 3 parish councillors, one of whom was Councillor Cottage, and they informed the rest of the council at the public parish council meeting that they strongly objected to the planning proposal. Kay was surprised that the discussion was in private, as she thought it would be discussed at the public meeting. She is aware that if councils have a large number of planning applications a year, they can do this, but Chard Oakford only had 27 planning applications last year. Also, there is a cottage being built in the grounds of Hambledon Cottage, which is extremely similar to Kay's in that it is outside the designated planning area.
Your 3 minutes is up. Can you wrap? No, you're allowed to just conclude.
Right, I would just like to conclude that that she's lived in the village for 8 years, owned her paddock for 21 years, and I'd like to say that I'm happy to, propose the fact that it be granted because it would be her home.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Nicholas Appleby, thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. Thank you. My name's Nicholas Appleby and I live in Child Oakford. I've known Mrs. Gardner for 7 years since I moved into the village. And she's always been a friendly, generous neighbour to many more than just my wife and I can say that. For some years, I regularly walked my dog along Melway Lane almost daily to access the footpaths beyond down that track, passing the holding that Kay owns. She tells me that she's owned for 21 years. She has a small yard and stables there. I'd passed several times before I noticed that there were stables. And because of the thick hedge, and it is tall, it's mainly hazel, and it shields the land from the weather and from view. A small, discreet home, to my mind, would be no more obtrusive than the building that is already there. I've never expected to encounter a vehicle when walking along the lane except at lambing time, although I know that some vehicles do use it, going by the tyre prints at the end of the tarmac area where her land begins. And that area, it would seem, is used for three-point turns. My home is almost in a direct line from Kay's yard to the centre of the village. And at a steady walking pace, I can walk from my home to the yard in about 4 minutes. I was in the army and I do have a steady pace. The other way, going in the other direction to the village centre, medical surgery, I can walk in 6 minutes. So the total distance is about 10 minutes, steady walking. I'm aware of the effort that Kay has been to carry water in her car for her horses from the property that she was renting in Station Road to the yard. Sometimes twice a day she was having to go in the summer, which will of course not be necessary if she lives there and has a borehole sunk. Without doubt, Kay enjoys all forms of rural life. She is a volunteer with the Farming Community Network and is also a dedicated member of the village, joining in with the WI events and often attending film nights. She belongs to the gardening club and has until recently helped with the Friends of Blandford Hospital charity fashion show. He also takes an active role in the village pantomime when it is in production. And most recently, she took a prominent role in the St. George's Day village celebrations. The point I would like to make is that
time's up now, so if you could wrap up, thank you.
Last 2 lines.
That's all right.
I would like to make the point that if she's denied the opportunity to remain in the village, as she hopes, the loss will be considerable to many people and also to a number of the institutions in the area.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Gareth Kitchen, the agent for the applicant. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members. I'm Gareth Kitching from Bluetown Planning Limited, acting as agent for Mrs. Gardner. Planning application seeks permission to demolish an existing stable and replace this with a traditionally designed dwelling to complement the rural character of the area. The small 2-bedroom dwelling will be finished in timber boarding under a natural slate roof accentuated by high-quality detailing. The application follows extensive pre-application advice from planning officers where their initial concerns have been fully overcome. Officers have assessed the proposal and provided a recommendation of approval, which we're grateful for. The Parish Council Planning Group has objected on the grounds that the proposal is an isolated dwelling, will have an adverse visual impact, harm highway safety. Taking those 3 points in turn. Location. As we've heard, the dwelling is situated in a sustainable location, a short 10-minute walk to the centre of the village, which provides a full range of services. The dwelling cannot be considered isolated in the truest sense of the word. Planning officers concur this is within a sustainable location. Landscape. In the wider views, the building sits in a secluded position, will be read against the backdrop of trees and hedgerows. New landscaping will be provided to soften and help assimilate this building into the landscape. The additional rural design, materials and detailing complement the rural character of the area. Planning officers are again satisfied that the proposal will not cause harm to the rural character of the area or the wider area of outstanding natural beauty. Highway safety. Two-bedroom dwelling will generate an average of 1 return car trip per 24 hours. That will have a negligible impact on the character of that quiet rural lane. Dorset County Highways raised no objection. Respectfully, the concerns of the Parish Council have been overcome. By way of local precedent, planning permission was granted in December 2021 for a similar development at Hambledon Cottage, Shaftesbury Road, Child Oakford. This site again lies outside the settlement boundary, a small distance from the centre of the village. Notably, Child Oakford Parish Council raised no objection to this proposal, despite this being a larger, more conspicuous 3-bedroom dwelling located at what is a busy road into the village. There's a question of reasonableness and fairness here as to why the Parish Council objected.
Sorry, could you wrap up now? Your 3 minutes is up. I'm very sorry.
In summary, the proposal will provide a small dwelling located in a sustainable location with an easy walking distance of Child Oakford. This will assist Dorset Council to meet its housing totals. Finally, the proposal meets development plan policy and NPPF guidance. It is on this basis that the application is recommended for approval by officers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. I feel very rude interrupting everybody, but it is the 3 minutes rule. Tim Cotton for the Child Oakford Parish Council. Thank you.
Members, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this application. Parish Council is very concerned about this proposal. We are worried that if it's approved, it will have repercussions for our village and all rural parishes in Dorset by setting a new precedent for building in its countryside. The existing building on the site is a small wooden stable located 200 metres from the defined village boundary, along a single carriageway lane used principally for agricultural access and a footpath. It's an isolated location serving existing equestrian activity and entirely appropriate use in the countryside. It's an arrangement that is typical of many similar locations beyond the fringes of Dorset's villages. The application is to replace the stable by a 2-storey dwelling, which will be 2.5 times as tall and nearly 4 times the volume of the current structure on the site. Should emphasise that there is no house there at present. The new house, with its associated domestic activities and comings and goings, will have the effect of extending an urban feel to an area that is currently essentially rural in character and surrounded by agricultural land. A recommendation to approve the application departs from local and national planning policy and from the advice clearly given by Dorset Council in a pre-application response to the applicant's agent only 6 months ago. In that advice, the officer unequivocally stated that the proposal was against various planning policies and that the council would be unlikely to support it. He said it was an isolated location and that approval could set a precedent for an urbanised ribbon of development which, given the rural character of the area, would not be welcomed. He went on to say that it would have a detrimental impact on the setting of the area of outstanding natural beauty by virtue of its urbanisation of a sparsely developed rural position. Parish Council completely agrees with that fundamental assessment, as do many of the individual objections this proposal has generated. Parish Council does not consider that the report before you provides adequate evidence to justify departing from it. We believe the application should be refused to protect our countryside. I'd also just want to say, it's not on my script, because Hambledon Cottage has been raised quite a lot. If you look at a map of Child Oakford, Hambledon Cottage is right slap bang in the middle of a very urbanised area, maybe outside official boundaries, but it's within, it's part of a main street. You know, it's a completely different location.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cotton. Thank you. Right, we've heard from the public. I'd now like to ask members if you have any questions, points of clarification. So I will start with Councillor Jones. Do you have any?
Just worried where the horse might go, but no.
Oh, all right. Councillor Pothbury.
Sorry, I have no questions. I'd be very.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cook.
Yes, just one, Chairman.
Yes.
Remember, one of the proposed people speaking in favour of this proposal was that it would help with our land supply figure.
Yes.
Given that there is one applicant for one house, is that an accurate representation, or can that be counted in that there is one person who is currently going to be occupying that house? Does that count towards our?
I'll come to, but I think you've put your finger on one of the things that Simon was at some pains to highlight in his report, that we're talking about we're talking about marginal gains because it's a modest home. It is nonetheless a home, but yes, clearly there's a world of difference between 1 2-bedroom house and a housing estate for 26. So it's a modest gain, but it's also modest harm. And so we're talking in very fine lines here, as I think I indicated. Well, that's what you're here to determine. Sam, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just that, Chair. So obviously, the weight you afford to the benefit, it changes with the quantum of development. 200 houses makes a significant, substantial contribution to housing supply, and one dwelling is modest, is small in terms of those benefits. Interestingly, when you talk about the word supply and delivery, obviously this is a full application. You've heard about the owner and likely to be the occupier, so we can surmise that there's going to be delivery quite soon. It's not a speculative outline application here; it's a detailed application. So that also affects that weight to afford to that benefit. But yes, you are in the realms of the tilted balance. It's, as you said, it's quite finely balanced because of the harm. In officers' minds, that benefit, despite it being small, is not significantly demonstrably outweighed by the adverse impacts.
But you're right, that's in essence the reason why it's here before the committee, because these are fine, it's a very finely balanced decision today. Any other questions for clarification? Yes, Councillor Hall.
Well, I do, but I have a question for our legal expert first.
Yes, please.
Well, I have to do this in a planning meeting. A resident has just raised what could be classed as a code of conduct issue with regards to the Parish Council. As I chair Dorset Council's Audit and Governance Committee and deal with code of conduct, should I be taking part in this agenda item?
Your side.
So it's quite difficult to one to advise on with that information. The issue, I guess it depends on whether the code of conduct issue relates to this application and your decision making on this item. So if the code of conduct question relates to a statement that the Parish Council has made in relation to this application,
There's no complaint to Dorset Council. It's a view held. That we cannot even hold the contrary view. There is not yet a formal complaint, if that helps.
Thank you. Chairman's just mentioned that there's not yet been a formal complaint
to Dorset Council.
To Dorset Council, and in that context, I don't think there'd be anything that precluded you taking part in this meeting if a conflict arose because of something that happened in this meeting in relation to you chairing in that committee hearing the complaint, and you might have to look at that time. Alternatively, if you wish to difficult matter, because I think you might have to do that anyway, regardless of whether you take part in this meeting.
So you might as well take part in this meeting.
Sorry, that was slightly confusing, but it's a slightly nebulous question.
As I've only just cleared the 2020 backlog, the chances of me remembering 2 years down the line is a bit difficult. So I will ask the question. In many respects, I don't have too much of an issue with this application, but there is just something that really bothers me. And that is something that I'd like some sort of advice and clarification on. We're saying that this is a sustainable location because it's within acceptable walking distance of facilities. Paragraph 92B of the MPPF states that decisions should be made and provide clear and legible pedestrian and cycle routes. This is a single lane road with trees, high hedges, and an awful lot of shade, and that really bothers me. And along with paragraph 97, planning policies and decisions should promote public safety. I got a real problem with this. If we weren't saying that this was a sustainable location, I wouldn't even be raising it, but we're saying it's a sustainable location, and I don't consider that to be a safe route that I would be happy to vote and say, yeah, this is all fine. I have a problem.
Very good question.
Somebody can help, I would appreciate that.
That's a valid consideration, Councillor. Thank you for the question. So you've got to balance that in your mind. When with officers considering this, one of the matters we obviously bore in mind is that it's a no-through lane, very lightly trafficked, so that it affects the considerations of highway safety. It's not the rat run or that actually goes somewhere and links to villages. I actually have walked that lane on 6 occasions now, as in 3 occasions in both directions, and I never encountered a car while traversing the whole length of the lane. That included right at the top, where you actually pick up the development on the east side, the close on the east side. And as I said earlier, it is a characteristic of many Dorset villages inside their settlement limits, where you are devoid of street lighting and segregated footways. And there's that balance to be made about, do you provide footways and street lighting on everything and completely change the character and appearance of the places, or do you just weigh in the balance? In this occasion, where you've got this no-through road, incredibly lightly trafficked, where actually you're preserving the character and appearance of the lane by actually not carrying out any alterations to it. Yes, you're walking on the same piece of macadam as vehicles will traverse. Yes, there isn't the street lighting, but it is a straight alignment. You are, there's no blind bends on that route, and it's incredibly lightly trafficked. And the other point I'd like to make, and one which comes up in all our considerations, members, is when you're considering that environmental, economic, social sustainability, you're considering it in the round as a whole. So there can be, and this is quite clear in case law and appeal cases, there can be deficiencies in certain areas of sustainability, but that doesn't make a development unsustainable. And it's something you've got to, balance up in the round. That's quite a long-winded answer to your question, Councillor, but hopefully
that's helpful. Councillor Hall, has that answered your question? You can.
He has provided an answer.
Thank you. Nicely put. Yes, you can come back to it in the debate should you wish to. Councillor Heatley.
I have no questions.
Thank you. Councillor Rideout.
I'm Councillor Belinda Rydeck, Ealing Ward. Just a couple of things sprang to my mind when Simon was making his report. Refuse vehicles and emergency vehicles, probably maybe out of our sort of remit here.
No.
But really the suitability of the lane to take those weighty vehicles, that's my concern really, and that can actually access the proposed development.
Good question. Access by an ambulance fire engine?
So I didn't see any vehicles on my whole time moving down the lane, but there are obviously there's a dwelling very nearby, and it is metalled its whole length. It is narrow. So I can't say for certain, Councillor Rideout, whether an emergency vehicle can get down the lane. There aren't any objections from my highways colleagues in terms of the access arrangements, as I say, and it is metalled to the point of access to the site. So,
well, to be fair, the actual lane up to the site, the picture was with grass growing in the middle of it. So that bit, I mean, the macadam.
If I sorry, I'll
just for accuracy.
Yeah, I'll just.
But I think the answer to your question seems to be we don't know one way or another.
Yeah.
We don't know that they couldn't.
So just on this aerial shot, the macadam extends all the way down to this point here. So you actually come down the adopted surfaced highway to this point here, you swing left onto hardcore for only about 10 metres or so before swinging into the site. And you've got, as you can see here, other development dwellings along the lane. It is narrow, and I've noticed, when I was walking, that other residents have, shall we say, placed objects in the verge to deter people from using the verges. There's blocks of wood and staddle stones and other paddles which have been placed there, which is quite common. But it is metalled throughout to that point. It's comfortably wide enough for a car. I can't say for certain, Councillor Rideout, whether it's sufficient to get a fire engine down there, but it is an adopted highway and we don't have an objection from my highways colleague.
Does that answer your question?
Chair,
Yes.
it's just, I think it was point 9 in your report that building control picked up on looking carefully at access for emergency vehicles. Get back into it.
No. All right. Well, it's slightly unresolved. You have raised it, but we don't know that there is not access. Is that your questions? Good. Councillor Jones.
We moved into debate.
No, we're still on questions. No good. Councillor Pothecary.
I'd like to make a statement more than no questions.
Could you hold your statement till we get into debate? Bless you. Thank you very much. No, Councillor. You had another question, then, Councillor Cook.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Actually, picking up on what Councillor Rideout just.
Is it one that we've just covered then?
Well, no, it's an actual question which hasn't been asked. It says within that building control team comment that consideration to be given to ADBB5. And I was just wondering what ADBB5 is, and added to that, on the grounds of safety that Councillor Hall was referencing, he was referencing maybe vehicular safety.
Yes.
But I'm thinking more of personal safety in that it is a long lane, and if it's one unaccompanied person with no street lighting, are we absolutely confident and comfortable with allowing a development to happen right down there, possibly crime to a person? Personal safety is something that I believe we should be taking into consideration unless there is any mitigating circumstance.
I think that's a good point.
Otherwise-
I think Simon would probably suggest that he has already answered this in that it's not wildly different from other lanes and roads in villages where you might be walking along and that. Is that?
That's correct. That's correct, Chair, and including a lot of lanes inside settlement limits in the development plan, which have been judged to be appropriate areas for development by, in the local plan or in neighbourhood plans. And I say this lane is particularly lightly trafficked. That reference, by the way, is part B is fire in the building regulations. There are probably. In my former life, I was head of a building control department. There are ways and means of overcoming issues with regard to location, but it's not a matter really before us as a planning consideration today.
Thank you very much. No other questions? Yes, Councillor Jones, you wanted to.
No questions. I cannot see any demonstrable harm in any shape or form. This applicant owns the land. She feels quite safe walking up and down her bridleway, and I'm very happy to propose the motion to get this passed and through.
Thank you very much. Councillor Apothecary.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this house is light on the land, environmentally friendly, good use of renewables. I'm absolutely delighted seconding proposal to recommend approval.
Thank you very much. Councillor Heatley.
I can't see any significant or demonstrable harm. Can I just say a word about long lanes? I live down a long lane, must be about half a mile. Yes, and mine's tarmac part of the way and then tarmac gives away. There's no street lighting. I use it on bicycle, on foot, in a car. I can't see it as a problem, to be honest.
No.
I mean, the world would be a different place if such lanes were abolished.
Absolutely, and I think it'd be fair to say the residents of Child Oakford are quite used to going out on a winter's evening with a torch in their pocket. We would never leave home without one. So yes, that's a fair comment. Anybody else got any comments to make, any debate to have on this? We've had a proposer and a seconder that it should be as per the recommendations. Right, I'm now happy to put this to a vote. All those in favour of supporting this application as in the officer's recommendation, raise your hands. Anybody against? No, that's good. That's very neat and tidy. Thank you very much. Very clear. Good. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Our next agenda item is urgent matters, or is that the one afterwards? And then what have we got first? Urgent matters. Urgent matters, we have none. Exempt business, we have none. Thank you very much. So I will now formally close the meeting at 16:18. Thank you very much indeed. Chairman, good.